You don't have to follow gravel racing that closely to know that the best racer in North America is Keegan Swenson. Keegan, great to see you. How are you?
Yeah, good to see you too. Doing well.
What's new for you this year on the bike, and what carries over from 2024?
Honestly, everything's pretty much the same from last year. We got this Explorer drivetrain, which I pretty much run exclusively now on the gravel bike. Really been a big fan of it. Here we got the 50 tooth on the front. Same, reserve wheels. Basically the same bike. Really the only change for me is the Hammerhead Karu for the head unit. And then some Hydro Pack bottles. But
look like you got some fresh rubber on here. How often do you change tires per race, and when do you make that call?
Almost every race you're kind of running kind of a different setup. At BWR last weekend I ran like the Aspen mountain bike tire front and rear. And then here we brought a few choices because it kind of depends on the what the weather does and see how the terrain is. We're gonna go ride some of the single track today and see like if these kind of smaller tires are good. Otherwise I'll put back on some little bigger tires. But kind of a last minute decision.
What is the widest tire you will ever run, and what is the narrowest tire you will run throughout the course of a season?
This bike will take a 2.4 in the front and about a 2.1 in the back, or 2.0 depending on the tire and the casing and the rim and whatnot.
Yeah.
So I have raced a 2.4 on it. I raced it at Big Sugar, then I actually used one at Gravel Nats as well last year.
Okay.
So anywhere from probably a 40 millimeter Velocita or something, all the way up to like a 2.4 Aspen, just depending on the course and the terrain.
Mm-hmm.
So
the Velocita is like almost a semi.
It's just
like
a full slick.
Yeah.
It's just basically a road tire.
Yeah, a fat road tire.
Yeah.
And where have you run that?
I've used them at where have I raced that tire? I used it at Gravel Nats a couple of years ago. Honestly, we don't use them as much as we used to, but I still have a couple just in case there's a race that's like really fast. If this crit here happened to be mostly on pavement, I would have got the Velocitas, but the course is mostly dirt, so we're still on gravel tires. So
just skewing more wider, more.
Everything is just trending wider now.
Sure.
And as we found, it's kind of just the go-to choice.
Sure.
From almost all of us. So.
One thing we've seen you do with your Santa Cruz Stigmata is put a suspension fork on the front, like at Big Sugar is the last time I remember seeing that. When do you make that call? Is that for fun? Is that for race technicality?
Yeah, so I actually used one last weekend up at BWR Arizona as well. I used the Rudy. And for me, it's really course dependent. It has to be kind of rough and has to be the right terrain. I also think it's better on courses that don't have like a ton of climbing, unless the descending's super rough to make up for it, because it does weigh a little more, and there is probably a small aero penalty. It's hard to quantify what that is, but the comfort and the efficiency of the fork is hard to beat sometimes. So it's fortunate enough that this bike is geo-corrected forward as well, so you put the fork on and the bike doesn't change very much.
Right.
So it still handles well and rides nice. So that's also just very course dependent. I'll use it probably 3 or so times a year depending on the race. I feel like we'll probably start seeing them more often because I think they're maybe better than we thought. I've gotten to really like it. So, but here it's relatively smooth. A lot of sand and kind of fast, hard pack roads. So back on the standard rigid fork.
Yeah, it's hard to quantify the gains or the losses from a suspension fork. You can
feel it.
You can feel it, and then sometimes driving a go-kart really close to the ground feels fast.
Right.
But it's not necessarily as faster than a Mercedes
at
twice the speed.
Exactly.
So, for me, like having a suspension fork bobbing a little bit feels slower, but
it might actually be faster.
Doing anything? Yeah. It's certainly faster on rough stuff, certainly downhill. But it's one of the interesting things I like watching professionals like yourself, tinker with that and look at the science and look at the feel and then look at the results.
Right.
Last time I saw you here in Turkey, Texas, you had on road pedals, and they've got mountain bike pedals. Is that a rain thing, a sand thing?
Yeah, a bit of both. Actually last year I had road pedals, but I actually swapped to mountain bike pedals just before the start.
Okay.
So I ended up switching because of the sand.
Yes.
So I think it's probably the same. This year I was like, I'm just going to bring mountain bike pedals. If I knew that like the sand was hard packed and I was like, felt like being out pre-riding all week or whatever, I would have had the road pedals and checked it out to see whichever ones were best. But the mountain bike pedals is like a small, relatively tiny loss in terms of weight and aerodynamics, and it's just the safe pick.
Sure.
So going with the tried and true pedals.
All right. Well, best of luck to you, sir. Thanks for your time. Good luck.
Appreciate it.
Have fun.